All right, so last time we ended up creating this general map area for us to work with. Now I want to add a drone, but I'm really only going to take this to get shaders right now. I want to start giving an introduction to shaders so we can start expanding on it in later lessons. If you're already comfortable working with shaders, particularly through Shader Graph, you can skip this. All we're effectively going to do is reproduce the URP default lit shader, at least as required to duplicate the operations of the drone we're going to select. That, and you might want to get the drone model. Okay, so let's get started. First thing is we're going to need that drone model. So this is what I'm using. I'm using this particular free sci-fi drones from Lucas Bober. Hopefully I said the name right. My apologies if not. And it works pretty well, particularly because of the damage to the materials on this. It looks like something you might find in a futuristic sci-fi junkyard. All right, so let's grab this and, oh yeah, open in Unity. I'm going to import this and import again, and there it all is. Let's close this one down. So we've got this in here, and the first thing is I want to select the materials, all the materials that are in here, and I can see that they're pink, so let's fix that. Edit, rendering, materials, convert, proceed. And they're fixed. Okay, so I've got the materials fixed. Next, I want to grab this red HyperX Scout. That's the one that I was just showing you in specific from their free assets. So this is a pretty good design. I like it, and I think it fits the background pretty well. All right, so we're going to want to duplicate the shader that it already uses, the material, everything. So I'm going to take this HyperX front red. This is it's actually broken into two parts. Let me show you this. Oh, oops, Control Z. Let's expand this one out and grab front. And you can see that there's actually two parts to this. The machine or underbelly that has kind of an engine look, and then the top shield face look. Since the underbelly is not something that we're typically ever going to see inside of the RTS, because we'll usually be looking at an angle like this, I'm going to ignore it and just use whatever it came with. I am going to produce a new shader and material for the top. Okay, so to begin with, this is going to become our drone. I don't want to mess with the materials and prefabs that already exist in sci-fi drones. Instead, I'm going to right-click on this and go to Prefab, Unpack Completely. That gets rid of any connection with its original prefab source. So I can minimize the prefabs folder, and that's gone now. Now I'm going to rename this to Drone. Okay, so I have our drone, and I'll drag it into our prefabs. Okay, great. Now that I've got that there, I'm going to go over to Body Front, and I can see that this wants to use this particular material. So I'm going to select it, hit Control D to duplicate, and drag that into our materials. Now I'll rename that new material to Drone. Okay, now one more thing that I want to do. I want to duplicate this existing drone that's here. And so we've got two of them in the exact same spot. I'm going to set one right here. So they're right next to each other. I can see them both pretty well here. I can see that the lighting pretty well matches, even though they're a little bit different one. This one has a slightly softer view, but I've got them both in here. So let's put that one there. And now one of these, this one on the side, I'm going to put my new material on. Okay, so new material. We're going to create a shader first. Right-click on RTS, create folder RTS. Or not RTS, shaders. From the shaders folder, oh, and I don't have my video up here, feed it up here at all, because there's no place for me to put this and actually not cover up something we're going to need to see. All right, so create C# script, no, visual, there we go, shader graph, URP Lit shader graph. That produces the shader graph file, and we're going to call it drone. And now we're going to double click it. Okay, this gives us our shader graph spot, but there's not really much space to work with here. I mean, we could shrink some stuff down, but we need more space. So I'm going to, let's see, I'll just need to expand stuff out. First off, let's save our default settings. I like the current one that I have, so I'm going to save the layout to default. Yes, overwrite. Next, I want to create a new one, so I'm going to start deleting things. Like I don't need console for doing shader editing most of the time, not this type. All right, next I want to take the scene view and drag it down here so I can see these side by side with the lighting set up for the scene, how everything will appear, and experiment and see what that's going to look like there. Next, I want to remove the hierarchy. I'm going to drag it over here, and I'm going to do the same thing with project, drag it down here, and maybe expand that up just a little bit. Excellent. Okay, now this is the shader graph. I can pull this down. This is our list of properties, our parameters to pull in. So if I'm looking at the drone over here, I want a base map. Okay, a base map with a texture. Great, I'm going to go over to here and say I want a texture, and I'm going to call this base map. There it is. That's what this is. It'll be an exposed field called base map where I can set a texture. Perfect. Okay, so now on this, I'm going to select that base map, and I want to give it a default just so I can work with it and see it in the main preview. So over on this side, I'm going to click on the base map, and that's selected it over here in project. So I'm going to drag that over to our default texture to use. Okay, great. So this is our properties window. I can see this is the name of it, the formal name. This is the code name for it, for where I would access it by C# later. All right, vertex, these two things that are over here, this is the output of the project, of the shader. So the vertex is dealing with 3D manipulations, changes to how it looks. The fragment is drawing all the pixels. So we want to draw this texture, and it's pretty easy. I'm just going to drag base map out here, and you would think I could just drag it over to here, but the fragment wants to draw a single color, which would imply a single pixel. But this is an entire texture. How is it going to know which one to get? To do that, we're just going to drag out here and let go. You can see as soon as I clicked on here and dragged out, I get this little line. Once I let it go, it asks to create a node. And that node, I'm going to ask for sample. I start typing in sample texture. Now, how do I know this? There's just a handful of them that you start getting used to. And then you start doing searches to find more, and it gets pretty easy. Okay, so this is showing the texture sitting inside of this. It's giving me a display to see what it looks like, what's being passed in, and any manipulations being made immediately. Now, this isn't manipulating it. What this is doing is it's providing an output for a single pixel RGBA4, a color. So there is the color. I just dragged it in, and now I can drag this part around on the main preview, and I'm seeing that texture. Now it's missing all of its reflections. It's missing its light and shadow changes that the normal map give us. And it's missing the emissive details that make these little gray spots right here glow blue. All right, so let's start getting the rest of it in place. I'm going to drag this up, and now this is taking a lot of space. So I want to start shrinking it down. Fortunately, I already can see that the texture is getting in where I want to, so I don't need to see the preview anymore. That's great for debugging, but I don't need it now. Second thing is, there's all these fields in here that I'm not using, including this one. This one is set statically, where this one is basically a separate node here being passed in. All the nodes will remain visible, but all the fields that are unused will be minimized here, and it only shows the line that connect to the other nodes. So I can basically shrink the whole thing down really small. Next, we're going to need to use normals. So here's our normal over here. Let's create another one. Here's our normal map over here. It refers to this image that's now at the bottom. I'm going to create another texture over here, texture 2D, and we're going to call it normal map. Now, normal maps, if you're familiar with them, they normally show up bluish in color. Nothing happened here, it just recompiled. So let's find that. Now you'll notice this is still in base map. I created this, but base map was the last thing I had selected. By clicking and dragging this out, it did select it and highlight that for editing in the properties field. Okay, so now I want to set the default texture. I'm going to drag this normal map that was there. Okay, so let's create another sample. I'm going to drag that out, get a sample. So we sample that texture. Now this is weird. It's blue over here, it's pink over here. Why? A normal map is handled a little bit differently. So you have default textures being pulled in. Well, this one is a normal map. So we're going to set it where we sample the texture. Now we've got our blues. Okay, now one other thing is this UV. I want to briefly explain what this UV does. The UV takes the 3D triangle of what we're looking at. So, so we've got these objects here that are made up of a lot of individual triangles to produce this stuff. You can kind of see it when I zoom into certain edges. Actually, can I just show it here? Nope. Not from this tiny window. Let's expand that out. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Wireframe. So you can see it's built up of all these individual little triangles, and all of these triangles map out to a texture. It says these various coordinates are where it's going to pull the graphics for this. So when it draws this part, it's going to grab the UV map or the textures or the pixels from this specific spot and set it there. All right, so this information about the UV, think of this as a game loop. It's a repetitive cycle that goes over and says, okay, for this UV position, what is the color? It's this one. Great. Pass it in there. And then it goes back. What's the next pixel? What's the next pixel? What's the next pixel? All right, so here it is. And now for this one with the normal map, it simulates light as if there were actual depth to the product. So you can see over here, this section is going to have more light depending on the angle that it's at. So even though the rest of this is shadowed, this particular triangle is still brighter. And it takes a little while, so it looks like there's actually this crack inside of here. That's great. That's what normals are for. All right, so I'm going to get rid of the main preview, and we've got the normals working. Let's shrink this down, and then set this up here with the other ones. I'm going to middle click on the background and drag this around to another spot so I can work with it a little better and zoom out. Also, I'm going to shrink this back, and I do want to see what we were doing, so I'm going over here and I'm going to set this back to shaded. All right. So there are the two shaded items that I was working with. All right, there's the normal map. What's next? Metallic. We've got metallic on the list next. So let's grab a metal map. All right, plus texture 2D. It's just another image like anything else. And texture 2D, this one's going to be called Metallic Map. So I'm going to drag Metallic Map out, and now I want to set its default up here. So I'm going to click on the Metallic Map up here. That selects it in the project view, and now I'm going to drag it into default. Great. Let's sample it. Now let's pass over the RGBA4. And now let's open up the main preview and make sure we've got metal reflections. And yes, we do. These parts are reflecting shinier where it's silver. Excellent. Now we can minimize this because we tested it. We know it works. Let's shrink it down more, put it there, and put the texture source here. The last one is emission. It has emission over here, which is this fifth one from the bottom. I'm going to create an emission map. We're going to go to Texture 2D, Emission Map. I'll drag it into here. And now I've got I want to set the default, so I'm going to drag that emission map up to here. Drag this out to sample. Drag the RGBA4 to wire it up to emission. And let's check this out. You can see the emission has a few tiny blue spots that are highlighted. That is these spots right there. Let's go ahead and take a look at that in our preview. There they are. They are glowing blue. They are much brighter now. So, all right, if I were to delete this, I can show you this again. And now they're not blue. It's just grayish silver. So as soon as I wire this up, there they are, blue again. Okay, so that is that's basically everything right there. We still need to test it and make sure that it works. So I'm going to start minimizing this stuff because we've seen it here in our sample view, in our preview, but that's not what it's going to look like in the scene. I haven't changed anything here. So I'm going to get rid of main preview for the moment, and I want to save the asset. So I click Save Asset up here. Now I'm going to click Show in Project. So it highlighted it for me right away. And I'm going to right-click on it. If you didn't know this, you can right-click on an existing shader file and go to Create Material. And when you do, it will create a material based off of that particular shader, so it's already set to Shader Graphs Drone, and it's got all the default properties set already. So that's a particularly great, fast way to do this. Now I'm going to call this material drone. And now look at this. This does look pretty right here compared to what we were seeing for the other one. I do want to drag in the first one that we had, just so we can see the differences. I'm not expecting this to be perfect. I just want it to be close. So let's go into here and let's press Control D to duplicate. And now I'm going to drag the one we just created up here and rename it Drone Original. I'm just pulling that so I can look at the difference between these two very easily. And look at that. For this, they look spot on. I'm not seeing a difference when I swap from one to the other. Excellent. But the real test is going to be on the actual item. So I'm going to drag in drone onto here. I didn't really see a change happen. I see various reflective spots, smooth spots, dusty dirt spots, and both of them have that. Perfect. There might be some subtle variation that's a little bit different, but it looks like it works to me. And that's one of the key things. Shaders don't need to be perfect. They need to make it look like you want it to look. So once you've got it good enough, I mean, figure that out. It's good enough. Okay, so one other thing before I leave you off here, because in the next video, we're going to start taking advantage of manipulating and adding new features here. This is easy to experiment with. Now that you have this drone in here, let's say that I want to just mess around with it and put in some more colors to it. Okay, so I'm going to put in a color. Keep this in mind. If you add a field here, you can change it in the material so you can see instant changes. So I'm going to add a color, and whatever, I'll just call it color. Great, I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to set the default color to white. Okay, so I've got this white color, and now I'm going to drag it out and put it into multiplier. I just want to explain a little bit about some very confusing topics for stuff that happens in shaders. What does multiplying a color by a number mean? So let's explain that briefly. So think of black as 0. Anything that you multiply by 0 will be 0 again. So if you multiply any other color by 0, it's going to turn black because black is 0. Now white is 1. And if you multiply anything by 1, you get the original color back out. So if I am using this node to multiply from these two sources, from color, which right now color is white, and the texture that we're pulling this in from, you can see there it is. Now, if I change this color to say black, as you can see, as I get closer to the bottom, it darkens up more because it's not allowing as much of it through until finally I get to 0 black and it's just all black at the end. That's all I'm doing with this stuff. If I multiply it by a different color, you're basically multiplying it by how much red am I multiplying it by. Think of absolute red as 1 and again black as 0. And then that's how much reds you're pulling in because it's working against RGB, red, green, blue. So now I know there's lots of red. So if I convert this to red, I get lots of color in here. But if I multiply that by green, oh, there's a decent amount of greens in here. I guess there's enough white. or blue. It's a lot darker here for the blue. That kind of works to my point a little better. The blue doesn't come through as much, so we see more darkness showing up because the blue doesn't have anything to multiply with. Again, if you multiply a low value by 1, you're still going to get a low value. All right, so that's how we're multiplying, and you can experiment with it to kind of see how that works. Just play around with it, try it out, see new things. Oh, and this, since I did this, I got this here, but there's no output. It doesn't change the preview of what comes out of this. So if I want to change the preview, this line right now from the texture is going straight into the color. Instead, I'm going to drag the output of this one there. And that's going to replace this line because there can only be one input coming into a spot. So that got rid of this line, and now everything in here is blue. And that might be a pretty cool effect. That I actually really like the way that this looks. However, this is also wasting a lot of space. I'm only allowing blues through, so why am I even bothering to carry reds and greens inside of the texture information? I'm wasting memory. So there's a lot of considerations. You can still manipulate and mess with this stuff. There's lots of fun things you can do. You can multiply the emissive colors. You can add to them. So let's add. I'll just try that one briefly. Getting rid of this one, and I can't change out the existing one, or actually maybe I can. Disconnect all, group selection, select unused nodes. Nope. Oh, convert to. No. Never seen a way to do that. So I'm just going to delete that. And now I'll drag this out to add. So we're going to add, which basically means, like, imagine that you're adding gray and gray, 0.5 and 0.5. You get 1. You get white. So if I am adding blue to this, let's go ahead and drag this out. I have to get the material or the outputs out of here. Look at that. I'm adding a lot more blue to this now. I can start changing that color, and you can see I'm now adding lots of greens. So there's lots of reds already. So red and green in light make yellow. If I add reds, the reds are getting brighter. And there's something else you can do with this stuff where you can brighten it really intensely, and that starts to bring out the bloom effect if you have bloom effects enabled. All right, so I'm going to put that on there, and now let's see the main preview. All right, so that is a brighter, pinker item, more salmon colored. And I just added. Now, other things you can do, you can add the different parts, different textures together, throw in your own texture, you can add it on top of it. There's all sorts of really cool things you can do. There's basic addition, subtraction, multiplication. Now that you generally have the idea of how to multiply colors, you can start experimenting with that and get more out of it. Now, before I leave, I just want to delete the changes that I just made and put this back. So that now resets to where that was, and this color field that is not used is gone, so everything is set back to where I wanted it as if I hadn't changed anything. All right, and of course, save and test. Save and test, save and test. Experiment with what it actually looks like in the real thing. And I'll see you in the next session where we're going to start to add a multi-tone sheen and highlighting around the edges for selection.